Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Welcome to Season 5 of the Author to Author podcast. I am your host, Pamela R. Haynes, and I interview self-published authors from around the world. I have excellent news to share. The Author to Author podcast is now available on 20 platforms, including Deezer and iHeartRadio. Also available on 4 hospital radios in East London and now Chalk Hill Community Radio. Welcome to our new listeners. The lovely people at Dalgety are still our sponsors. Use the discount code A2AS5 for 10% off your next Dalgety tea order. I'm delighted to share that I will be a guest speaker for International Women's Day on the 8th of March 2023, addressing 100 schoolgirls in the London Borough of Newham. Coincidentally, the same day this podcast was launched 2 years ago. I cannot wait to tell you all about it next week. Or if you can't wait, follow me on Instagram at Loving the Author to see all the photos from the event. Also, in conjunction with Lyman Beach Restaurant, we launched the Lyman Beach Online Book Club last month. We are reading Keisha the Sket by JLB this month. Contact me on Instagram or Facebook if you would like to take part. In this week's episode 0, I interviewed the master blender himself, Mark Dalgety. Let's jump into his interview now. See you on the other side. Hello, Good evening there, Mark. Thank you for joining me on the Author to Author podcast. I can't quite believe that we're at season 5 already, bearing in mind we've only been around for a couple of years. So thank you for taking part. Mark, where in the world are you now? Because I can't keep track of you.
Oh, I'm out in Ghana in West Africa at the moment.
Okay. And how is that going? Is it a sunny day today?
Yep, sunny as it can be.
Lovely.
Definitely compared to London.
How long do you plan to be there this time around?
I normally spend 2 months in Ghana is my base for West Africa. So 2 months here and then 2 months in London. For the last 18 months or so, that's what I've been doing. I spent 2 months in London and then 2 months in London and potentially anywhere else. Yeah. So that's the rotation I'm on at the moment. Yeah.
Right. Okay. That's wonderful. But in terms of your heritage, Mark, where are your family from?
My family originally from Guyana, in the Caribbean, not Ghana, Guyana. Yes.
Okay. And in terms of Guyana, I mean, everybody knows, I think, Jonestown, but whereabouts in Guyana are your family from?
That's terrible. If there's the only part of Guyana everybody knows Jonestown, considering it so many years ago, I don't know, 40 years ago. And ironically, no Guyanese was actually even involved in this stuff. It was all Americans. Because they were in a deep part in the jungle where they had their own little village going on. So we just heard about what happened. Nobody in Guyana actually knew much about it. You actually have to look at the international news to see what's going on, you know. But I mean, my family originally came from a part of Guyana called the Corentyne or the Berbice, the county of Berbice. But I myself grew up in Georgetown, Guyana, which is the capital, and I also grew up part of my formative years in a city called Linden, which is a mining city where they mine bauxite and aluminium.
Okay. And in terms of geographic location, is that north, south, east, or west of the capital?
That's a good question. Going up to Linden, obviously we're going up to Linden. So it might be south for some reason. I think it's definitely inwardly. You know, it's not near the coast, and I mean it's a very industrial city. So it's all about industrial. You know, I mean it's not a tourist area. It's purely, but there are buses and trucks moving around mining bauxite and aluminium, as I said, and other rare minerals and things like that. Yeah.
Yes, I know it's a country full of natural resources, but describe for me what a perfect day in Guyana looks like.
Oh, a perfect day. That's an interesting one. You're talking about when I was smaller growing up?
Yes.
I mean, just all over. I mean, as I said, we use the word strain. Basically, I mean, in Linden was very exciting because, I mean, Linden, being an industrial city, we were always in the mines or the old mines, on these big sand hills and mountains playing, whether you're making sand castles or we imaginary skating down the mountains, thinking it's be ice skating because it's like white sand. And then there's also the creeks that are created in all these places that we might be swimming. Um, Coupled with the swimming, you might make we used to turn half barrels, half drums like the oil drums and so forth, turn them into little mini boats, and we probably be paddling, racing in those boats. That's another thing we'll do. Out of that, you could end up being I mean, there's always trees everywhere. There's always some fruit season, whether it's a mango season or we had something called fat pork or jamun or whatever it is. So depending on the season, you could find yourself with your friends in a particular tree that seems to be loaded with mangoes or whatever. So that's another option. Another things you might do is there's always houses getting built. So when they have built, you tend to go and be swinging from different ladders, from one ladder to the other, climbing on the top of the rooftop and things like that. I mean, normally, if you think about it, I mean, parents will always consider these things dangerous, but to us as a youngster around 10, 11 or 9 years old, that's pretty much a very exciting thing to do, And then we have games that we play all the time in Guyana, whether it's War Break, Cowboys and Indians, there's so many things. You never get bored, actually. Absolutely never get bored.
It sounds like you're describing a really lovely childhood, and obviously you went to school in Guyana and
Yes.
did quite well. So when did you travel to London?
I traveled to London when I was about 19, 20. Ironically, originally, although I grew up in Guyana, I was actually born in London, but my parents actually sent me, they were studying at the time, they sent me back to Guyana when I was 1 year old. So I lived all my life in Guyana, and then I came up to London once on holiday when I was probably about 12 or 13. And then when I was 19, I finished my A levels in Guyana, spent a year working, and then I came up by myself when I was 19 to London.
So you came up to live with your parents or to study?
No, no, by myself to study basically. My parents were living in Guyana. Yeah, they went back to Guyana. So yeah,
Right,
so I
right.
came back on my own basically at 19. Yes.
And I know that you went to university. Which university did you go to, and what did you gain a degree in?
I went to South Bank University and I did chemical engineering. Yeah, so it's a lot to do with manufacturing systems.
Oh, right. That's what I was going to say. That, what did you gain from doing that degree, which helped you or made you come to that decision that you wanted to move into manufacturing? What was it about that degree?
Well, although the word says chemical engineer, it's really a lot to do with processing, manufacturing, but obviously more from the industrial side. I mean, me making tea, it's really it's just a lot of processes, a different product. I mean, my excitement is not. I mean, a lot of people in the early days used to ask me about what tea. I didn't really know much about what the different herbal teas were until I went back to Guyana and elders basically taught me what was what. But my passion was always about packaging the tea in the right format to make it basically available for the modern day consumer or for a West Indian, African, or anyone that basically wants to enjoy a natural beverage, right? That is unadulterated, okay? That tastes pretty much like how they would have tasted when they might have been living in the Caribbean or Africa, where normally you would have just picked the leaves off the tree and put it in a pot and boil it. So the passion was really about trying to package it and maintain that flavor and provenance and smell and taste and every single thing, in the teas that we make.
Why tea and not coffee or another product? What was it about teas?
Um, it was just what's the word they would say? I just fell into it. I mean, to tell the truth, I mean, I started a business. I mean, not because I ever planned to do teas. I was busy trying to relocate to Guyana about 20, 25 years ago. Because I mean, when I came to London, I worked a bit as a courier. Then I went and studied, and then my aim was to basically be back in Guyana. But unfortunately, I had a mortgage that I bought a property in London, and I was trying to live in Guyana with a mortgage in London. And in so doing, basically, I'd run totally flat broke. So one of the ideas I felt is that I needed to do something if I could be based in Guyana that could earn me pounds. And in my quest, right, for in trying to do that, I came up to London, because I came up to London, and somewhere along in the quest, old Chinese Guyanese in Brixton mentioned to me if I could get some Cersei tea bush for him. And I don't know what Cersei was, and then he told me that Cersei is what we call Corilla in Guyana. And I mean, there's loads of Cersei and Corilla all over Guyana. So I asked him what sort of volumes he wanted, and he said any amount. And I thought, well, that's a very big number. And he said, yes, I mean, people buy for diabetes, blood pressure. I can't get enough of it, and so forth. And I just arrived back in London. I had about, as I said, I was totally broke, but I had about £1,000 in a credit card. And I thought, I'm not going to stay in this winter again. I just jumped to the next flight, okay? And jumped at it and went down to Guyana. I think it cost me the ticket was about £500. I took the balance of the money and engaged, went to the rural areas where my grandparents lived, and galvanized along some of my cousins there and some of the kids and guys I knew, and told them to go into the farms and the back dam, because the Cersei grows a lot in clean fields and so forth. And I told them to just galvanize it for me, and I bought in about £1,000 of it. But anyhow, the bottom line is my parents weren't at home, and I actually sat down, took the Cersei bush, used the scissors and cut the £1,000 of Cersei into 16,000 1 ounce packets. And then I brought it back up to England and went back to the guy, and I started selling for 50 pence each. Well, he took most of the stuff, and then I couldn't understand what he was actually doing with it, because I mean, these things like these bushes in the Caribbean, I mean, we just call them bush tea. I mean, it's normally what we say the less fortunate people drink. Everybody aspires to drink all the nicely packaged, Nescafe coffee or Milo or Ovaltine and, nicely packed PG thing. And then all the herbal teas, the herb teas like the lemongrass and the Cereses and the gingers is, you leave it for the guys in the country. I mean, as I got old, I thought to myself, I no matter my cousins in the country always had the smoothest skin, the whitest teeth, the thickest hair, looking very much more healthy than us in the city. The only difference is that their clothes were a bit more tatty than ours, because we live in the city, we tend to be more up to scratch with the latest styles. And you always tend to, your cousins in the country always tend to have a bit more tattered clothes. But when you get back down to the bottom of how they looked in terms of the physical look, they were always stronger, smoother, much more healthy, white teeth and every single thing to go with it, you know what I mean? And as I got old, I realized that's probably the reason that they were looking that way, because they weren't drinking any of this adulterated, imported, tinned, packaged stuff that came from some of the foreign lands, But I mean, that was basically the beginning of the teas, and I then eventually started going to shops to understand what and where the Cersei little packets, because it wasn't in tea bag at that time, I must let you know. It was actually in just a loose bush in a small 1 ounce packet, and it was just being sold for between 50 pence to 75 pence. Until one day, back again in Brixton, an Indian shopkeeper said, "Oh, you calling this thing tea? Where's the tea bag?" And I was like, "Tea bag?" He said, "Well, you calling it Cersei tea? Where's the tea bag?" And I don't know, that just kept in my mind, tea bag. And then it dawned on me that, by the way, this stuff a lot of these Europeans were actually calling herbal teas is bush tea in a tea bag. So then my whole engineering faculties went into overdrive, basically. And then it dawned on me that, well, why don't I start teabagging all these herbs and so forth that we have in the Caribbean and package it properly for a modern day consumer? Because, I mean, in those days, in the early days, 25 years ago, a lot of folks, when they went back to the Caribbean on holiday, they always came back with a lot of bags with all these different bushes to make the tea in England. You see what I'm saying? That was one of the things that if somebody is going to say, "Oh, bring me some lemongrass, bring me some sage, bring me some Cersei," and they always had these. I mean, I'm pretty sure the customs in the UK eventually, realized it wasn't all necessary marijuana as such, because it was just a standard thing with the Caribbean people to do. So I think me now making it available in a nice tea bag, packaged, and more importantly, keeping it to the flavor that they would have wanted, became a reasonably successful venture.
And that's a wonderful answer. And it's interesting what you say about, having the tea in a tea bag. I certainly remember my mother boiling cerasine for us to drink, and we didn't want that. That was too, out
Too
there. That
bitter.
was obeah, that was witchcraft. We want to see it how we recognized it, which would be in a
Yeah,
tea bag and all of that.
yes,
But I mean, thankfully, tastes have changed, people have become more sophisticated, and there is a return back to having the source, having things as naturally as possible. And you've been able to, get on that wave. But tell us,
yes.
how many variety of teas do you have?
Well, as we speak here now, we've got about 37 lines of teas. I mean, in the early days, we started off with Cersei. Then I think we started doing lemongrass. We went into peppermint, fever grass, then ginger. Then we started doing different blends. I mean, normally as we move, we begin to continue looking at the market and look and see what people are asking for. And then we started developing different families and different things. I mean, over the journey, different things became more important at different times. So in the early days, it was a lot of colds and coughs and so forth. So we did a lot of gingers. Then we began to move into things like when the more healthier stuff, the super teas like the moringas. We did noni, we did turmeric, as turmeric is good for the inflammation in your system. Then we moved into instant teas because then I mean once I began that idea came a lot from when PG Tips had tried to create an instant normal black tea with granules. And I thought to myself, well, I mean, why can't you create a herbal tea in granules? So that took a bit more research, in terms of how do I be able to extract out the ginger, add honey. I mean, and then what you did is do something called spray drying and then got it back into a granulated form so that people could just pour it, the ginger with honey, and it dissolves in your hot water. From there we now start developing a lot of what you call wellness teas. Wellness teas are teas that are associated with a particular ailment. So one of the first ones we did was with our slimline. We did a lot of research and understanding how could you make a tea that will help somebody to reduce without adding any artificial additives, and that became a hit. And then we realized that people were complaining about sleeping disorders. So then I did a bit of research and then created good night sleep. So that's kind of like the journey we're on now, is more like doing more wellness teas. We're looking at researching to do with menopause and, or arthritis. So that's where we're heading now, because for years we did mainly teas like pure teas, and then we did a family to go with it. So we do pure turmeric, and then we did pure turmeric with black pepper. As you know, something like turmeric and black pepper. Black pepper increases the dissolving rate of turmeric in your blood, which helps to get rid of by about 2,000%, right? Which helps to get rid of inflammation in your system. And as some people might or might not know, the inflammation in your system is related to what actually makes you sick, because that's where all the virus, bacteria, and germs that's their home. So the less inflammation you have in your system, the less mucus you have in your system, will automatically create an environment that less bacteria and viruses can live. So hopefully you don't get as sick as you might normally get.
It's good to hear that you're moving into the well-being stuff as well. And if you're looking for a tester for the menopause groups of teas, then I'm the person that you need to be speaking to
Okay.
about that.
Okay.
Because it's in line with what's happening, isn't it? The government are looking at for people to acknowledge menopausal women in the workplace, and if
Yes.
there should be special leave for those women to helping managers recognize the symptoms of the menopause as well. So it's really good
Yes.
that your complement of teas are on a life journey.
Yes.
No matter what stage people are at, they can have a tea that complements what they're going
Yes.
through at that particular
Yes, and then
time.
the
So
soursop.
that's
I
wonderful.
forgot to mention. Yeah, I forgot to mention the soursop, which, as you know, there's a lot of work where soursop is good for cancer. So we're doing a lot of work on that. So we started with pure soursop, and then we did soursop and moringa, soursop with ginger. So that was one of the ones that we did in the last 3 years, I think. Yeah, developing along that line.
So Mark, out of all of the teas, do you have a favorite?
I actually, that's a good question. People always ask me that from time to time. I find that I go through cycles. It's like sometimes you find, I mean, the teas I think I drink very often is the ones that don't taste good, which is the Ceres tea and neem. because it's bitter and it's all about cleansing the blood. So that one is like I have to drink it, but it's not necessarily my favorite. Okay, if you ask me, so a question: which one you drink most is Cersei and Neem, but it's not actually my favorite. If I could do without drinking it, I would be quite happy, right? Because it's bitter, right? But then there's a lot of nice tasting ones you drink for different times of the year based on what is going on. If for instance you're working very hard or you're stressed, I would probably drink things like the lemongrass or even a good night's sleep. In the winter, I drink a lot more of the gingers. These days, I drink a lot of the turmerics in the ginger in the winter also. Lemongrass is nice for relaxation. So sometimes if you think you're overworked, you tend to drink a lot of the lemongrass. Indigestion for peppermint. And sometimes what happens is that you might drink a particular tea and you tend to begin to enjoy it and you think, oh, this is very nice. And then you drink it probably even for a month or 2 months. And then you think this is the best tea that you've done. And then one day you pick up one of them that you haven't drunk for a long time. And then you think, wow, this actually tastes very nice. And then you start drinking that one, and it ends up being a cycle like that. I might not drink peppermint for a month or two, and then one day I might pick it up and then think, oh, this peppermint tastes very nice. And then I start drinking peppermint for another month, until one day I pick up a sorrel and ginger or something like that I haven't drank for, say, 2 months or a month, and I taste and think, oh, this is not bad actually.
It's funny to hear you talk about
Yes.
the Cersei tea, because when I was interviewed by your colleagues with regards to sponsoring the podcast, one of them did say, "Oh, I hear that you love all of our teas," and I said, "I have to confess." I only drink Cersei tea because it's good for me, but I don't enjoy it. And so it's refreshing to hear that you say the same thing. It's about drinking what's good for you,
Yes.
and it's going to do the body some good.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's funny to hear you say, that. Congratulations on your recent interview with Caribbean Plus magazine. Tell us what that experience was like, and do you feel comfortable promoting your business in that way?
Yes, I do. I always say, of recent, one of the things the quest I'm on is actually to digitize the business, because I always felt that, I built the business in an old school manner. And the word I tend to use is that I build the business in what you call analog mode. If you think of analog radio and digital radio, and analog mode is based on, in the early days when I first started, I was on the road, I was walking from shop to shop, selling. And then, I locked in the whole of North Circular, and I had over 500 customers. And then I went into Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield. I found wholesalers. There was a lot of leg work. I was literally doing about 70,000 miles a year in my car. Yeah, easily. I had to change cars every 18 months or something like that. Okay. Now, the way to get to consumers is through what you call a digital mode. Digital mode is whether you're using influencers, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, whatever it is. Now, because I came from an old school, right, I need to recalibrate my mind into a digital mode, and I'm obviously also trying to get people who are working in a digital space around me now. Yeah. So one of the few things that I could personally do in terms of from a digital point of view is obviously do these podcasts, like have an interview with you, have an interview with, because then it helps to promote the brand and people to know a little bit about the brand, where it came from, the provenance, the history and everything. Because to tell the truth, for many years, I pretty much used to hide behind the tea box. I didn't actually want anyone to know where I was anyhow. I was quite happy to be in the background. Everyone knows these. But then, after some pushing and so forth from staff and various people, they started saying, I think it's important people begin to know the face behind Dalgety, because many people don't actually know Dalgety is a hardcore Caribbean company made by a hardcore Caribbean man, So after some sort of, spoken by folks, I started taking, doing the interviews and get a bit more public about who I am.
Yes, that's why I asked the question, because we're only knowing who Mark Dalgety is now, even though the name has been around, the brand Dalgety has been around for a number of years, which is why I asked you, the question. But let's move on a bit. Congratulations again, because you have now got the business into Africa and Korea. Is that right? And how did that happen?
I would say one of the things with Mark Dalgety, I'm what you call the original entrepreneur. The word entrepreneur is being used very widely these days, but an entrepreneur ultimately is somebody who basically looks for and tries to do things that have never been done before. So, and turn it into hopefully a profitable venture. So my ideology is that I don't see any reason why every time if you think of China or you think of Asia or you think of India or whatever it is, that you should be thinking that what could I go and buy from these guys? My thinking is normally what could I sell to these guys? You see what I'm saying? And you have to look for the angle. What is it that they don't have that you think you could provide them with? Okay. And based on that sort of quest, I mean, if I meet a business Chinese associate, many times they're trying to sell you something, but just as they're trying to sell me something, I'm trying to sell them my stuff also. Many years ago, in the first 5 years in business, we sold tea to China, right? Because they couldn't believe the ginger that we were tasting was so fiery. It was like 4 or 5 times the ginger that came out of China. I was a bit ahead of my time then, because I mean the Chinese actually wanted me to set up a factory there, and I mean I made out to them I was so big, and that was really not a very big company. So I definitely coughed way above my head. And then I was afraid that, I mean, if I'd gone into business with them, I'm pretty sure you would have seen loads of Dalgety teas all around the place, like Nescafe, but it wasn't coming from Mark Dalgety. So I just thought to myself, let me back down from that. Apart from the fact that around that time I was just about getting listed in Tesco's. So I didn't really want to lose the opportunity of getting listed in some way where I had a bit more control than to try to be, jump from, creeping and then trying to basically skyrocket or become a super jet without understanding the dynamics and the economics with dealing with, big heavyweight corporate guys out in China. I mean, saying that, I mean, what came along is, with the South Korea deal is simply, I met a South Korean guy who was passionate about teas, and he was involved in marketing and so forth. And he worked and he was building, I think he was in the medical field, and he was a marketing specialist. And he was heading back to South Korea, and I convinced him to, why doesn't he take our teas? Because he said he always used to walk with it back to South Korea, and his especially our instant teas, and his family all enjoyed it. So that used to be one of the things that he would pack in his suitcase when he's heading back to South Korea. So I basically convinced him, why doesn't he start trying to sell it? And then he took up the challenge and and started selling it online in South Korea. And then he took one line, went through the whole registration process, and then he took another line, and then now we've now got a distribution agreement with him. He's now beginning to speak to some of the bigger distribution companies in South Korea. But I mean, that's just to say, I mean, why, as a black person from the Caribbean or Africa, why should we always be thinking that everything that we have to, go and buy it from somebody else when we actually have all the things? And many a times these guys actually buy this raw materials from us, make it, and then sell it back to us anyhow. So we need to start making the stuff ourselves and selling it to them. I mean, as I sit here in Africa, that's one of the biggest issues. I mean, Ghana's got loads of cocoa. It sells the cocoa to all the European countries. They make chocolate with it. They sell them the cocoa for, 50 pence or whatever it is a kilo, and then sell them back a chocolate that's probably got 25 grams for, 3 pounds. Why aren't you making the chocolate yourself? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So where next? Where would you like to see your teas on the shelves? Which country?
I mean, my focus is a lot in Africa, to tell the truth, because, I mean, we're also doing some work in America. But the reason why I personally have positioned myself in Africa is because the capacity is humongous. I mean, if you understand, people don't realize that. I mean, there's something I actually call geographical racism, because Africa has actually got about 1.5 billion people, okay? The map is made in such a way that it looks as though it's smaller than many countries in the world. When the African continent itself could actually, the whole of China, India, United States, the whole of North America, England, and probably Europe, they could all fit in Africa, And to me, I mean, with that kind of capacity, I mean, why am I heading to territories? And also our consumer base was based on people from ethnic minorities, I mean, what they call ethnic minorities in the United Kingdom. So our biggest customer base, we supply about 5,000 shops in the UK. And it's all shops where mainly people from the Caribbean, India, Africa, and Asia in general shop at. So I thought instead of me trying to head more into, say, European markets, where I have to deal with combination of different languages, whether it's French, German, Spanish or whatever, head to Africa where, okay, there's a lot of languages, but then the general language when people don't know each other's language is normally English. So I thought, well, this would be the better option for me to head to, compared to spending more and it costs much more to spend to develop it in the UK. Not that we're not doing any work to develop it further in the UK, but consider the size of the company. Some of the things that we do over here, we get much more leverage to expand the brand on the African continent. So that's pretty much the reason why my focus is a lot here. But I mean, it's not saying that we're not doing work in America. We set up a company there, but I've got an American counterpart who's working on that also.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I loved, to hear you talk about the continent of Africa. You can be in Ghana, but, you've got the rest of the countries in Africa to conquer as well. I just don't think that we can fathom how big that space is, how big that country is with our
It's
Western
absolutely
minds.
humongous. I mean, one of the things I always felt when I think one of the biggest shocks I have had in Africa is a number of years ago when I was in Nigeria. I was speaking with a youngster who was trying to sell me, I think it was sorrel hibiscus. And the first thing is that I couldn't afford to buy the amount he wanted. I mean, the guy was literally sitting down with the short pants and the slippers. He wanted to send me a container, which has like about 15, 20 tons, and I only wanted like 5 tons. And we ended up in a conversation about, where you're from. So I said to him, I'm from Guyana. He didn't know where Guyana was. Yeah. So the next question, I explained to him where Guyana was. And then the question he asked me that blew my mind, he said, I mean, how many people live in your country? And I said, we approximately 1 million. And he turned to me and he said, 1 million people in your whole country? And he said, but my village has 8 million, right? I said, your village has 8 million? He said, yes, my little village has 8 million. So then he went forward to say that he is just a small little farmer and all he sells, poor him, only sells 1 container a month. 1 container a month, he's earning about 10,000 US. You know what I'm saying? Right, with his little short pants and rubber slipper, because he was also measuring himself up to the top guy in his village who he says was selling about 40 containers a month out of the village. And I'm like thinking to myself, could you imagine that? 8 million people is in his village. Because sometimes, when you sit down in the so-called modern world, I mean, you see these photos if you never visit Africa and you see a village and you literally think because you come from the Caribbean, it's 2,000 or 3,000 people. You don't think of a village that's got 8 million people. You see what I'm saying? So that just blew my mind. I mean, you realize how misconnected you are with the continent altogether.
Well, I wish you every luck with all of that. But my final question is, if you had a book, what would you call it?
That's a good question. I just not think of having a book. I think I had an idea. I think I was going to call it 9 containers, please. I'll tell you the reason. 9 containers, please. I've got an order that we're working towards. We're just waiting on the finance to go through, and it's based in Nigeria. And I got caught again based on the same issue with the 8 million people. Right? I've got a Nigerian business associate who started buying Dalgety teas, small. And then he said, look, I've got some big orders that I think we could really do well with Dalgety teas in Nigeria. Okay. So I said, okay, that sounds great. I know he was buying a few pallets ever so often and he was running to Nigeria and selling it. So I said to him, okay, fine. I mean, you're going to take a container now. And I mean, how do you want me to assort? Because he had nine different lines of teas. He said he definitely has a orders for. So I said, okay, well, you buy a container now. How do you want the assortment? One of which flavor, how many flavors? Yeah, because I anticipate that you'll buy a mixed container. And he looked at me totally shocked. He said, this is Nigeria. I want 1 container of each product. To start with, 9 containers with the starting orders. You know what I mean to say? I mean, he couldn't believe why would you think, he said, this is Nigeria. Why would I want a mixed container? You said it's 300 million people live in the country. You know what I mean to say? So I always said that probably if I have a book, that's what I call it, because that's the first largest order that ever. I mean, I embarrass myself, obviously, in terms of the way that they call us diasporians or from the Caribbean, we thinking. There's me thinking, yes, a nice big order. The guy's about to order 1 container, and he looks at me as though, I mean, am I thinking straight? You know what I mean to say? He wants 1 container of each product. So I always said, if I do write a book, that's why I call it 9 containers, please.
It sounds like everything is about you having to change your mindset, rather than thinking quite narrow. So how did you go about that where you're starting to think globally?
My passion was always globally, to tell the truth. I mean, when I started, one of the reasons why focus on just doing teas, right, is that when you start business, right, building a brand is one of the hardest things, and it takes a long time and to craft it, you know. And I think in the early days when I first started making teas, I felt that, I want to be like Lipton. That's what came to my mind. I want to be the Black Lipton, basically, you know? And sometimes, during the journey, and in order to do that, you cannot just focus on trying to sell your teas in Brixton or Harlesden in London or New York City only or whatever it is, you know? You got to be thinking much bigger than that. It might not happen in my lifetime, but at least I'm setting a platform for it to be achievable, you know? When you set a business plan, you got to be taking a business plan that is for about 100 years. You would probably necessarily hit 100 years, but that's how you have to think of it. Because in business, there's always ups and downs. And sometimes people, as soon as they get to something that is a challenge, they tend to switch. So what tends to happen is that you're continually switching, but never developing anything to its full maturity. What I decided to do is stick with teas, although I do get a bit excited occasionally and make non-tea products, because I did have a pepper sauce brand. I had plantain chips, I did cassava chips. I do bitters, which I still do, which is along the Herbal line. People still ask me for a pepper sauce, you know what I mean to say? But I couldn't build 2 factories, you know? So I thought, let me focus on what I started off wanting to do. And then when I think of getting new markets, it's more to do, or increasing my revenue is more about where else could I sell to, and not necessarily decide to become a wholesaler and decide, okay, somebody just asked me for some ackee or some yam, and I'm just going to jump off the rail and start selling ackee and yam. As you see, because that's a different business model. That's a straight wholesaler model. In the early days, a lot of shops used to say to me, man, every time you come, all you're selling is these 4 or 5 packets of teas. Why don't you bring something else? Especially when they realize I'm from the Caribbean. Can't you get it for me? Can't you get it for me? But what they didn't realize is that, I was only selling 5 packets of tea, but instead of, a guy who might have 200 product lines selling to, say, 50 clients, I had 5 product lines selling to 500 and 1,000 people. It just involved much more work, but then it also reduces your risk, because that's why some wholesalers, sometimes someone gets into wholesale distribution, they have 200 lines, they have 50 clients, the tides change, you lose 25 clients, and your business goes down the drain. If you have 1,000 clients and you lose 100, it doesn't really affect you. If you lose 200, it doesn't affect you. And it's rarely you're going to lose 500 just like that, unless you did something absolutely crazy, So, that's always been my process of thinking.
So how much do the books that you read support you in the business and the work that you do? For example, you recommended a book to me called Why Should All the White Guys Have All the Fun? I think that's it, which I did read. So in terms of the literature that you read, how is that connected with inspiring you in your business?
I very much like to read books that are, especially Black books by Black entrepreneurs that have gone beyond absolute stardom to the galaxy, basically. Because normally their journey is more synonymous with somebody like myself, in terms of the challenges. White men have why should white men have all the fun? Obviously, he's one of the ultimate entrepreneurs in the Black community. In the early 70s, who had built a multi-billion-dollar company, as when you read the book. He died at a young age, but when you think, this guy basically, when Chrysler and Ford Motor Company was having financial problems, he was one person that bid the highest, until he realized he was a Black guy and he didn't want to sell to him. But then he eventually still managed to build the largest supermarket chain across Europe, because nobody knew who he was. And his company, Beatrice International, had a supermarket chain that was bigger than Sainsbury's and Tesco's and all of those. And then, the other great guy for me was a guy who built Ebony Magazine, which is J.H. Johnson, in Succeeding Against the Odds. Those kind of guys definitely inspire me, because, obviously they came from bare bones, literally bare bones, to reach to the level that they have reached to, And and if you think of both of them, they have also built in getting involved in a global thing. Ebony Magazine is just not an American magazine. It's a magazine that we find all over the world. So, any serious Black person that is thinking about really getting to serious heights, you have to think globally. And more importantly to me, not just in reading and even being in Africa that I'm speaking about it, is that because we live in the Western, we only see the few guys that are doing great. But when you come to this part of the world, you begin to meet some serious business people that, I mean, I met some Nigerian guys, and I'm one of them, that they only move with private jets. I mean, these guys don't even want to catch first class play. They think they're losers if they're doing that. And I mean, it's not like one or two of them. I mean, it's just like standard amongst some of them. And it's like thousands of them. It's not one of them. You know what I mean to say? Yeah. You see big buildings here. I meet people who have hotels that are almost as big as a Hilton hotel, and it's just a man and his wife. But you see this here in Africa. We don't experience those things when we're living in the UK or in England. That person becomes the token guy that has this great stuff. Over here, there's tens of them. The quality of what they're offering is on par with any hotel you'll see in Park Lane in London or something like that. As a Black person from the diaspora, it is very encouraging, and makes you more confident that you could achieve things.
It sounds as what you're saying is that there's a popular trend I've noticed in the last few years of people from the diaspora go into Africa, especially Ghana, the Gambia, and so on. And there was an argument to say that we should be traveling to Africa more frequently and experiencing what Africa has to offer. And I know that people are now, getting on board and doing different retreats to different parts of Africa. And we should at least be visiting at least once in our lifetime to experience what Africa is about.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, obviously, there's also Africa's now opening up and also themselves realizing, because I think the population is so humongous here. I mean, I think they're also realizing the importance of engaging with the Blacks in the diaspora. For some unknown reason, I don't know whatever reason it was before, why, I mean, many Africans came, they studied, and they went back. I mean, and then there's always the issue where they might feel that, okay, the guys in the Caribbean or yeah, obviously we lost our culture to some extent. So there was some amount of disconnect, you know what I mean to say, between people of African origin or the hardcore Africans who were born and bred in Africa and the Africans who were born in the diaspora. But I think over the years, it's slowly fusing, where we both accepted each other and our differences and understanding each other. And I mean, one of the greatest things I think that's even happening right now is the emergence of Afrobeat music. You actually now seeing African artists performing in the Caribbean, like Burna Boy or whatever. You see what I'm saying? To me, it's creating a more and more fusion between, I mean, there's supposed to be new flights happening between, I think it's Ghana and Barbados or Guyana or Jamaica or some one of the countries. And I think that would help a lot.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's Ghana and Barbados in particular. So
Yes, yes,
lots of nurses have traveled from Ghana to live and work in Barbados, which is,
yes, yes,
absolutely wonderful to be able to see that
yes,
kind of meshing of cultures and,
yes.
feeling as though we're part of Africa. Just one final question. What books are you reading now?
To tell the truth, I'm not finding enough time to read books. I have to change my reading habit because I am the old school reading, which is like straight paperback. What I find is that I probably need to get into those audio reading books because I'm missing out a lot, because I'm so busy. And I mean, a lot of times when I do read, I don't read books. I tend to read more technical stuff. You know what I mean? Like I might be reading something new on a technology or a machine or a business concept by somebody. So I'm not reading books as in novels as much as I used to do before, because that's one of the nice things about growing up in Guyana. I mean, we didn't have all these TVs and things to sidetrack us. So one of our big things was reading a lot, Hardy Boys books, if you know the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drews, all the Cowboy, Louis L'Amour, Sudden, all these books, Nick Carter, all these books, you used to pride ourselves in reading the whole series out, you know what I mean to say? You actually walk with your chest in the air if you completed a series of any of the detective books, Alfred Hitchcock and these things, I think obviously the emergence of coming to this part of the world or the Western world with the TVs and now the computers, the book reading has become, for me at least, the paper book reading has become a bit not easy to do since I'm very busy.
Thank you so much for taking part in the Author to Author podcast, and I'll be in touch with you real soon. Thank you, and bye for now. I hope you're inspired by listening to Mark Dalgety's interview. I certainly was. It is competition time now. To win a copy of my book, Loving the Brothers, and complimentary boxes of Dalgety Herbal teas, answer the following question. What are the names of the two black entrepreneurs who inspired Mark? To take part, please DM me the correct answer by Friday the 10th of March 2023 at 5 p.m. GMT on Instagram or Facebook. Have a wonderful week ahead. Bye for now.